It wasn't the pasta that scared her. It was the fear that her own body had started turning against her. Margaret used to love her small plate of Italian spaghetti, but tonight she pushed it away. Her daughter smiled unaware, and Margaret whispered, "Maybe later." But later never came, because sometimes losing your appetite means losing a part of yourself. But 90 days later, something changed. Margaret sat at that same table again and took her first bite of joy.
Margaret, 72 years old. Her kitchen was her world, where the smell of butter, garlic, and rosemary blended into the fragrance of family. She wasn't a chef, but every meal she made was a quiet act of love, seasoned with memory. Then one morning, that love began to betray her. Her cup of coffee burned her chest. Her favorite pasta left her swollen and tired. She told herself, maybe it's just age. Age. 2 simple letters, but heavy enough to make us accept pain as normal. Margaret began eating less and eventually stopped saying yes to joy. One evening, her daughter called, inviting her out for dinner. Margaret looked at the glowing screen and pressed decline. She lied, saying she was tired, but the truth was she was afraid. Afraid of leaving the table halfway through. Afraid of the worried look in her daughter's eyes. Afraid of becoming a burden in the very home she built with love. That night, she felt truly alone in the house that once fed everyone else. The next morning, she opened her old notebook and wrote 3 simple words. Day 1. Listen. She saw her doctor, and for the first time heard the word inflammation. Not as a disease, but as a fire quietly burning inside her gut. She didn't understand every medical term, but she knew one thing. Her body was trying to tell her something. That night, she brewed herself a cup of tea. Not out of habit, but because the warmth felt kind.
From that first line, Day 1, listen, Margaret began her quiet journey, not with medicine, but with food, as if tending to a garden she had forgotten for years. She started looking at her plate differently, not as a meal to survive, but as a garden to nurture. Weeds were inflammation. Seeds were probiotics. Fertilizer were the prebiotic foods that help them grow. Researchers at Harvard found that each of us carries trillions of microbes in our gut, tiny gardeners that shape our mood, energy, and immunity. But when we feed them with too much sugar, refined oil, or processed food, we end up watering the weeds instead of the flowers. Margaret wrote in her journal, "Less sugar, more peace." From that day on, she traded her morning toast for oatmeal, added a spoon of plain yogurt, drank more water, and kept a piece of grilled salmon for lunch. Nothing complicated, no strict diets, just choices that made her body smile again. Consistency heals. Perfection burns. Nutrition isn't a battlefield. It's a conversation between what you eat and what your body remembers. When you eat with patience, your gut learns to trust you again. But like every garden, Margaret made mistakes. For a while, she cut out all fat, thinking that less oil meant more health. Soon her skin became dry, her sleep restless, and her energy faded. Because our body still needs the good fats from avocado, olive oil, and fatty fish. They protect the heart, help absorb vitamins, and calm inflammation from within. Margaret smiled as she realized healing isn't about cutting things out. It's about learning what to keep. The garden heals when we care for it with patience. The body isn't only a garden, it's also a river, where movement itself is life. After weeks of changing her diet, Margaret noticed something new. Even with better meals, her body still felt heavy, especially when she stayed still for too long. One morning, she decided to walk, just 15 minutes around her small backyard. But something began to shift. She could feel something move inside her, like water beginning to flow again. Researchers from the Mayo Clinic found that gentle movement after meals activates a process called peristalsis, the rhythmic waves of the gut that help food move and digest naturally. When we move, our body also releases a protein called BDNF, what scientists call fertilizer for the brain. It strengthens memory, reduces stress hormones, and soothes inflammation in the gut. Margaret didn't know what BDNF meant. She only knew that every slow walk made her belly lighter and her mind quieter. So each morning after breakfast, she took 15 minutes, not to exercise, but to breathe. Sometimes she carried her cup of peppermint tea, walking slowly, watching the light move through the trees. Her heart slowed, her body softened, and at night she slept through until dawn. Movement doesn't have to be intense, it just has to be consistent. Even stretching your shoulders before bed or walking around the living room tells the body you're safe to flow. Once, Margaret tried to change everything at once. She gave up coffee, cut out wine, forced herself to walk for hours. But the more she forced, the more her gut resisted. Because the body doesn't respond to extremes. It listens to gentleness. When we rush change, the body sees it as another kind of stress. She learned that healing isn't about doing more. It's about doing softly. The river heals when it keeps flowing gently. Weeks passed, and Margaret began to notice something new. Even when her meals were perfect, a single worry could make her stomach twist. One morning, as she sat waiting for her doctor, her gut tightened again, not from food, but from fear. Scientists call this the gut-brain axis, a two-way bridge that connects the mind and the digestive system. When the brain senses danger, it sends a fight-or-flight signal throughout the body. Blood rushes away from digestion toward the muscles, preparing us to escape, even when the threat exists only in thought. For Margaret, the threat wasn't a wild animal. It was a question that lived quietly in her mind. Will this meal hurt me again? The body doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. Every worry becomes a storm within the gut. One afternoon, Margaret visited her neighbor, who offered her a cup of herbal tea. It was light, fragrant,
A calm breeze in a cup. She took a sip, and her breath slowed. That tea, peppermint tea, was more than a drink. Researchers from Johns Hopkins described peppermint as a natural muscle relaxant for the gut. Its menthol helps calm smooth muscles and sends safety signals back up to the brain. When we inhale its aroma and breathe a little deeper, the parasympathetic nervous system awakens, the body's rest and digest mode. It tells the gut, you are safe to soften. Before this, Margaret tried to control everything, every meal, every step, every symptom. But the harder she tried, the more her body fought back. Healing doesn't come from control, it comes from trust. A deep breath can sometimes do what a cabinet of pills cannot. Now, each evening, she brews her peppermint tea, turns off the lights, and listens, not to her fear, but to her heartbeat. No more fighting, no more forcing, just a woman learning to listen again. The bridge heals when the mind finally listens.
Some say the body lies, but science says otherwise. The body never lies. It simply speaks a language we've forgotten how to listen to. At Harvard University, researchers followed thousands of older adults who embraced a Mediterranean-style diet, rich in greens, fish, whole grains, and olive oil. Within just 3 months, markers of inflammation in their blood dropped significantly. Another study from Johns Hopkins showed that activating the gut-brain connection through relaxation and deep breathing not only reduced bloating and discomfort, but also improved sleep and cognitive clarity. When Margaret read about those findings, she simply smiled, because for her, it wasn't research anymore. It was real. She had lived the data. Science explains the mechanism, but compassion delivers the medicine. Margaret's journey became proof that healing isn't a battle between knowledge and feeling, it's a partnership between the two. Logic and love, mind and body, science and soul, finally breathing together. Science may guide us, but compassion heals us. 3 months had passed since she wrote those first words. Day 1, listen. Now Margaret was different, not because of luck, but because of the quiet patience she gave herself every day. Her inflammation had nearly vanished, the bloating down by 80%. Her skin glowed again, her sleep deepened, and somehow her thoughts began to quiet too. Science calls it neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself as we create gentler habits and softer emotions. But what Margaret remembered most wasn't the data. It was the day she sat inside a small Italian restaurant downtown and dared to order her favorite pasta again. When the plate arrived, she placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I stopped listening." Sometimes healing doesn't happen when we find new medicine, but when we stop treating the body like an enemy to be fixed. It begins when we speak to it like an old friend we've forgotten. And in that moment, Margaret realized joy was never about food. It was about presence, about being alive in her own body again. The transformation isn't in the cure, it's in the kindness. 90 days later, on the final page of her notebook, Margaret wrote, "Just 5 minutes a day, yet it changed the way I listened to my body." That 5-minute ritual was mindful eating, a practice of slowing down and beginning every meal with 3 deep breaths. Each breath sends a signal of safety to the nervous system, and in return, the body softens, as if saying, "I trust you again." For Margaret, it wasn't just a new way to eat, it was a new way to live. Your body is speaking. It's time to listen. Margaret's story might also be your story, mine, or someone's somewhere who's been quietly ignoring the small signals their body sends each day. Because maybe each of us is living through our own chapter of healing. Which chapter are you in? Is it the garden within, learning to nourish your body again? The river of motion, rediscovering peace through movement? Or the bridge between mind and gut, learning to let go and truly listen? Share your story, because your wisdom might be the light that helps someone else find their way. And if this episode spoke to you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Elderly Wisdom Cares, so we can keep walking this path of healing, one breath, one story at a time. Your body is speaking. It's time to listen.